18 seconds. That is the total duration from the moment the driver's eyes registered the anomaly ahead to the moment the first round impacted the armored glass in front of his face. 18 seconds. In that sliver of time, a decision had to be made, a decision that would determine the survival of a three-man crew, the security of $5 million in bearer bonds, and the outcome of a meticulously planned ambush executed by a cartel kill squad. This is not a story about heroism in the conventional sense. It is a clinical dissection of a critical incident. It is an analysis of the psychological and tactical anatomy of a choice made under unimaginable pressure, where standard operating procedure pointed one way and survival pointed the other. In the world of high-threat asset protection, we have a saying. It is a grim aphorism, but one that contains a fundamental truth about the nature of the work. The vehicle is your weapon, your shield, and your coffin. Which of these it becomes is decided not by the machinery, not by the armor, and not by the enemy, but by the mind of the person in command of it. Today, we will break down how one man, in 18 seconds, ensured his vehicle remained a weapon and a shield, and refused to let it become his tomb. The operation itself was routine to the point of being mundane, and therein lay its primary vulnerability. It was what is known in the industry as a sweep run. On a predetermined schedule, a cash-in-transit, or CIT, vehicle collects processed funds and negotiable instruments from multiple banking institutions within a dense urban financial district. The route is efficient, designed to minimize time on the road, but this efficiency breeds predictability. For weeks, the crew had run a similar pattern, a fact that had not gone unnoticed by the adversary. The target was not cash, but something far more valuable and less traceable. $5 million in non-registered bearer bonds, a form of financial instrument so liquid it functions as currency for high-level criminal enterprises. The loss of these instruments would be catastrophic for the financial institutions, but their successful theft would represent a major strategic victory for the trafficking organization that had commissioned the attack. The vehicle assigned to this detail was a state-of-the-art armored truck manufactured by a specialized security vehicle company known for its work with government agencies. It was not the lumbering bank vault on wheels that most civilians picture. It was a modified commercial truck chassis, discreet in its appearance but fortified to a B6 ballistic protection level. To the layman, this designation is meaningless. To a security professional, it is a clear and concise statement of capability. B6 level armoring is designed to defeat multiple impacts from rifle caliber rounds up to and including the 7.62 by 51 mm NATO cartridge, the standard for military battle rifles. The body panels were composed of hardened ballistic steel, and the windows, nearly 2 inches thick, were a laminate of polycarbonate and leaded glass. This transparent armor could stop a direct hit from a sniper rifle at 100 meters. But it had its own limitations. It was susceptible to delamination after multiple strikes in the same area, and it created a significant risk of interior spalling, the ejection of high-velocity fragments from the inside face of the armor, even without a full penetration. This level of protection comes at a cost, and that cost is weight. The vehicle, fully laden, weighed just over 7 tons. This immense mass fundamentally altered its handling characteristics. It was sluggish to accelerate, slow to brake, and had a turning radius closer to a city bus than a commercial truck. Its suspension was reinforced, and its engine was tuned for torque over speed. But it was, in essence, a fortress designed to withstand a siege, not a chariot designed for a race. Its primary defensive system, beyond the passive armor, was its mobility. The tires were military-grade run flats, capable of sustaining multiple punctures and continuing to function for at least 50 kilometers at reduced speed. This was the core of the vehicle's defensive philosophy. absorb the initial assault, and use the run-flat system to escape the kill zone and reach a designated safe area. It was a doctrine built around endurance, not aggression. The crew consisted of 3 men. In the rear compartment, surrounded by the secured assets, was the cargo guard, a junior operator with 2 years on the job. His role was to be the last line of defense, isolated and protected, with instructions to never open his compartment under any circumstances during an attack. In the front passenger seat was the communications guard, a 5-year veteran responsible for monitoring police bands, maintaining contact with the central dispatch, and if necessary, returning fire from the passenger side gun port. And then there was the driver. He was the senior man on the team, a 15-year veteran of the private security industry, who had previously served a decade in a military reconnaissance unit. He was quiet, methodical, and possessed a preternatural calm that other guards sometimes found unnerving. His file noted an exceptional aptitude for vehicle control and a documented history of non-standard but successful resolutions to security incidents. He understood the grim calculus of his profession, that the armor plate he sat behind was merely a tool to buy him time, and time was a resource to be spent on making one correct decision. This crew, this vehicle, and this $5 million cargo were being sent into a perfectly prepared trap. The ultimate source of the crisis was not a tactical failure on the day of the incident, but a catastrophic intelligence failure that had occurred weeks prior. A thorough post-incident investigation revealed a deeply embedded source within the logistical operations of one of the client banks. This source had provided the trafficking organization with a complete schedule of sweep runs, vehicle descriptions, crew complements, and, most critically, the exact date and manifest of the bearer bond transfer. The security company itself was not breached. Its procedures were sound. But in the interconnected chain of modern logistics, security is only as strong as its weakest link. The attackers knew where the truck would be, what it was carrying, and the standard procedures the crew was trained to follow in an emergency. They had every advantage. They had planned for everything except the one variable they couldn't quantify: the willpower of the man behind the wheel. The architects of the ambush were not common criminals. The tactical signature of the attack, from its location selection to its execution, bore the hallmarks of professional soldiers. Subsequent intelligence suggested the team was composed of former special operations personnel from a South American nation, now working as high-paid contractors for a major cartel. These were men who understood the principles of fire and maneuver, who knew how to create and exploit a kill zone, and who were equipped with military-grade weaponry. Their professionalism was their greatest asset, but it was also the seed of their eventual failure. They had built a perfect trap for a predictable target, a textbook solution to a problem they believed they fully understood. Their chosen location was a masterpiece of tactical geography. It was a slight incline leading up to an overpass on a secondary highway that skirted the city's industrial zone. The location offered several distinct advantages. First, it was a natural choke point. The concrete retaining walls on either side of the incline effectively funneled the target vehicle into a narrow channel with no immediate options for deviation. Second, the overpass itself provided an elevated position for a spotter, and more importantly, for a heavy weapon designed to disable the vehicle. Third, the surrounding area consisted of abandoned warehouses and disused lots, offering excellent concealment for the assault teams and multiple escape routes after the fact. Finally, the distance from the nearest police precinct meant a response time of no less than 7 minutes, an eternity in the context of a CIT ambush. They had created what military tacticians refer to as an ambush box, a 3-sided trap where the target's forward momentum is halted, and it can be engaged from the flanks in a dominant high position. The plan was brutally simple and efficient. It was a multi-phase operation designed to systematically dismantle the CIT vehicle's defenses. Phase 1 was the stop. A stolen cargo van painted to look like a municipal maintenance vehicle would be positioned sideways across the 2 lanes of the incline, simulating a breakdown. This soft block was non-threatening, designed to persuade the driver to do exactly what his training mandated: stop at a safe distance, report the obstruction, and wait for the situation to resolve or for law enforcement to arrive. Phase 2 was the fix. The moment the CIT vehicle came to a complete halt, a sniper positioned on the overpass would fire a single .50 caliber round into the engine block. The goal was not to penetrate the crew compartment, but to catastrophically disable the vehicle, destroying its primary means of escape. Phase 3 was the assault. With the target immobilized, 2 fire teams positioned in concealed locations along the right side of the road would initiate overwhelming suppressive fire. This fire was intended to pin the crew inside, shatter the ballistic glass to degrade visibility and communication, and prevent any attempt to return fire through the gun ports. A 4th element, the rear guard, was positioned farther back to engage any responding police or security units. With the crew suppressed and isolated, the final phase would involve an assault team using specialized breaching tools to force open the cargo doors and seize the assets. It was a plan characterized by patience, precision, and a deep understanding of the target's expected behavior. Their single fatal assumption was that the target would, in fact, behave as expected. They had planned for compliance. They had not planned for defiance. The entire event unfolded in less than a minute. At 6:47 in the morning, with the sun just beginning to burn through the low-lying industrial haze, the armored truck began its ascent up the incline. The road was empty. The driver's hands rested lightly on the wheel, his eyes methodically scanning his sector: road surface, shoulders, mirrors, overpass. It was a trained rhythm, an unconscious loop of observation honed by thousands of hours behind the wheel. At 6:47 and 18 seconds, he saw it. A white van, parked diagonally, blocking both lanes approximately 150 meters ahead. Inside the cabin, the initial reaction from the passenger guard was one of annoyance. He reported later that his first thought was of the delay, the paperwork, the disruption to their schedule. This is a textbook example of normalcy bias, the powerful human tendency to assume that a situation is normal and that any anomaly is non-threatening. For the passenger, it was a broken-down van. But for the driver, it was a problem that did not fit. His mind had already begun to cycle through the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act, the decision-making framework developed by military strategist John Boyd. His observation was the van. His orientation was where his experience and training processed the raw data. The van was too clean for a municipal vehicle. There were no warning triangles, no flashing lights, no driver in distress visible nearby. Its position was too perfect, too deliberate. It was not an obstacle. It was a plug. He oriented the data and came to a conclusion that diverged sharply from normalcy bias. This was a deliberate block. This was the trigger for an ambush. Standard operating procedure was clear. In the event of a non-threatening road blockage, the driver was to halt the vehicle no less than 100 meters from the obstruction, report the situation to dispatch, and await instructions. Stopping was the safe, prescribed, and defensible action. But the driver's orientation of the threat led him to a different conclusion. Stopping would mean surrendering the vehicle's only true advantage: momentum. Stopping would mean willingly placing himself and his crew in the geometric center of a pre-selected kill zone. He had approximately 10 seconds to reconcile his training with the SOP. His training told him that static defense is death. At 6:47 and 21 seconds, the decision was made. The passenger guard started to reach for the radio handset to call in the blockage. He reported that the driver simply said one word: no. His foot which had been hovering over the brake, moved to the accelerator. The 7-ton vehicle, which had begun to decelerate, surged forward. In that exact moment, the enemy acted. The spotter on the overpass, realizing the target was not complying, gave the command to initiate. A thunderous crack echoed across the roadway as a .50 caliber round, fired from a heavy sniper rifle, slammed into the front of the truck. The round struck the engine block just as intended. A geyser of steam and fluid erupted from under the hood, and the vehicle shuddered violently. The attackers' plan to immobilize the truck was in motion. They believed they had won. At 6:47 and 24 seconds, the world dissolved into a storm of noise and violence. The two flanking fire teams opened up with a coordinated volley of automatic fire. The sound inside the cabin was not the discreet pings of Hollywood movies, but a deafening, continuous roar, like 1,000 hammers striking the hull simultaneously. The ballistic glass on the driver and passenger side starred and crazed into a spider web of opaque white fractures. The passenger guard was thrown against his door by the concussive force of multiple 7.62 millimeter rounds impacting just inches from his head. He could feel the heat of the impacts through the thick paneling. The vehicle was being systematically dismantled, but it was still moving. The driver was now fighting the machine itself. The .50 caliber impact had cracked the engine block and shredded the radiator. Warning lights flashed across the dashboard. The power steering was gone, and controlling the immense weight of the truck now required all his physical strength. He was wrestling with a dying beast, but it was a beast that still had forward momentum. Through the shattered, almost useless windshield, he had one focal point: the white van. Standard operating procedure, his corporate training, every instinct of a normal driver screamed to stop, to seek cover from the hailstorm of bullets. But his military training, his 15 years of experience, had forged a different instinct. It was a cold, hard piece of tactical logic. The only way out of the kill zone is through it. He did not brace for impact. He leaned into it. He held the accelerator to the floor, forcing the dying engine to give him every last ounce of torque. The collision was not a crash. It was an act of tactical demolition. The 7-ton armored truck, even at a relatively low speed of 40 kilometers per hour, carried an immense amount of kinetic energy. It struck the 2-ton cargo van not head-on, but on its front quarter, using the principle of the wedge to impart maximum rotational force. The van, which had been a barrier, was transformed into shrapnel. It was lifted from its axles and thrown violently to the side, peeling open like a tin can as it slammed into the concrete retaining wall. The sound of the impact, a brutal shriek of tortured metal, was momentarily louder than the gunfire. For the attackers, this was the moment their plan irrevocably fractured. The target had refused to be fixed. It had used its own mass as a weapon to breach their trap. The ambush envelope had collapsed. The fire teams, who had been positioned to engage a stationary target at a 90-degree angle, were now facing a moving target that had already passed their optimal firing solution. The driver did not slow down. He pushed the truck through the newly created gap, through the mangled wreckage of the van. The rear element of the ambush team, which had been tasked with blocking pursuit, was now ironically blocked by the very vehicle that was supposed to initiate the trap. The escape was a running gun battle, but a one-sided one. The attackers, now scrambling and out of position, fired wildly at the retreating truck. Rounds ricocheted off the rear doors and chewed up the road surface behind it. The truck's tires, all 4 of which had been punctured by the fusillade, were now running on their solid rubber inserts. The vehicle was loud, shuddering, and barely controllable, but it was pulling away. The driver held his course for another 2 kilometers before the engine finally seized completely. He brought the crippled vehicle to a halt, not in the kill zone, But in the middle of a busy intersection, surrounded by witnesses and in direct line of sight of a police patrol car that was responding to the initial reports of gunfire. The engagement, from the first shot to the truck clearing the ambush box, had lasted a total of 48 seconds. In that time, estimates suggest over 300 rounds of small arms fire had been directed at the vehicle. Not a single round had penetrated the crew compartment. The aftermath was a study in contrasts. When law enforcement and the security company's rapid response team arrived at the scene of the ambush, they found a battlefield. The roadway was littered with hundreds of spent casings from at least 5 different weapon systems, including the massive .50 caliber shell. The mangled wreckage of the cargo van lay against the wall, its interior filled with tactical gear and extra ammunition. The attackers themselves were gone, having vanished into the industrial labyrinth. However, they had not escaped cleanly. They left behind a trail of blood from at least one operative who had been injured by shrapnel from the collision. This DNA evidence, combined with intelligence recovered from a discarded radio, proved instrumental in a series of raids over the following months that led to the dismantling of the entire cartel cell operating in the region. Their return on investment for this meticulously planned operation was zero. They had lost personnel, exposed their presence, and gained nothing. The state of the armored truck told its own story. It was functionally destroyed. Every body panel was pockmarked with dozens of deep impact craters. The engine was a complete write-off, the .50 caliber round having shattered the block and severed critical fluid lines. Every window was a mosaic of shattered, opaque laminate, completely useless for visibility. All 4 tires were shredded, the vehicle resting on the compressed run-flat inserts. The interior, however, was a different story. The crew compartment had held. The cargo was completely secure. The human cost was minimal, a testament to the vehicle's protective design. The passenger guard suffered a dislocated shoulder when he was thrown against the door, and both he and the driver sustained minor lacerations on their hands and faces from the secondary spalling of paint and metal fragments from the interior walls. They were alive. They were mission effective. And the $5 million in bearer bonds was safe. In any after-action review, the goal is to synthesize the data and extract actionable lessons. The success of this outcome was not a single-point victory. It was a complex interplay of technological success, institutional failure, and human triumph. The B6 level armor performed exactly as designed. It absorbed a level of punishment that would have obliterated a lesser vehicle, and in doing so it created a window of survivability. It bought the driver the precious seconds he needed to process the situation and act. Technology, in this case, was not the solution. It was the enabler of the solution. It held the line long enough for the human element to become the decisive factor. Conversely, the incident was precipitated by a profound failure in institutional security. The intelligence leak from the client's side highlights a critical vulnerability in the modern security landscape. The most advanced armor and the best trained crews are rendered irrelevant if the adversary knows your playbook. The attack did not begin when the first shot was fired. It began weeks earlier with a data breach in an office building miles away. This underscores a fundamental principle. The foundation of all physical security is intelligence security. Without it, you are merely reacting to a crisis that should have been prevented. The failure of the antagonists is equally instructive. Their plan was tactically sound, professionally executed, and based on a correct assessment of the target's standard procedures. Its failure was rooted in intellectual arrogance. They had planned for the procedure, not for the man. They created a perfect scenario that hinged on the target's compliance. When the driver chose to defy their script, when he chose to transform his vehicle from a shield into a weapon, their entire plan became brittle and shattered upon impact. They failed to account for the one asymmetrical element in the equation: the resolve of a trained professional who understood the real rules of the game. From this single 48-second engagement, we can distill 4 critical lessons that are applicable across the entire spectrum of security operations. First, intelligence security is the foundation. Every partner in a logistical chain must be held to the same rigorous standards, as a breach anywhere compromises security everywhere. Second, static defense is death. In a mobile security context, the moment you become a stationary target, you have ceded the initiative to the enemy and are living on borrowed time, measured in the structural integrity of your armor. The primary command must always be to keep moving. Third, equipment buys time, but training determines outcomes. The best technology in the world is useless if the operator does not have the psychological conditioning and tactical knowledge to employ it effectively. The vehicle's armor was the shield that allowed the driver's training to become the sword. Finally, methodology must evolve to meet the sophistication of the threat. The era of smash-and-grab attacks is being superseded by military-style assaults planned and executed by professional adversaries. Security protocols, and especially the training of personnel, must be elevated to counter this new paradigm, emphasizing non-standard problem-solving and aggressive, proactive responses over passive, compliant procedures. Ultimately, this incident was not won by horsepower or hardened steel. It was won by a decision to reject the easy, prescribed path and embrace the hard, dangerous, but correct one. The driver, in that critical moment, understood the true nature of his environment. He saw the incline not as a road, but as a channel. He saw the van not as an obstacle, but as the lid of a box. And he saw his 7-ton truck not as a target, but as a battering ram. This was not an act of blind aggression. It was an act of supreme tactical clarity. It was the result of years of mental conditioning, of running countless scenarios in his mind, of training his instincts to see beyond the immediate and recognize the lethal geometry of the situation. In our training programs, we talk about the concept of the mental bridge. It is the crucial, often instantaneous psychological crossing point where years of repetitive training, classroom theory, and simulated scenarios cease to be abstract knowledge and become instinctive, decisive action. It is the moment a professional stops thinking about the procedure and starts fighting the problem. The driver in this incident did not have time to consult a manual or debate options with his crew. He had to cross that mental bridge in the span of a few heartbeats. His entire career had been the process of building that bridge, so that when the moment came, he could cross it without hesitation. The fight goes to those who understand that the only way out of the kill zone is through it. End of debrief.